Grief don't always knock before it walks in. Sometimes it just shows up, bold as brass, when the coffee's still warm and the sun's barely stirred the curtains. But loss, real loss, it ain't just about absence. It's about the things unsaid. The love withheld. The silence that stretches out like a cold hallway you don't dare walk down anymore. Some wounds come from strangers. Others come from the ones you held in your arms, kissed goodnight, prayed over when they had fevered foreheads. And when they turn round and hurt you, well, that kind of pain lives in a deeper place. Somewhere marrow deep. If you enjoy stories like these, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd subscribe, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It always means something when folks like you take the time to listen. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. The casserole dish was still warm in my lap when my son shut the door in my face. It had a little foil dent where my knuckles had pressed too tight, trying to hold steady. Just stood there, clutching cornbread and grief, with a thank you note still in my purse, thinking how odd it was that you could give someone life and still not be welcome in theirs. I found his baby shoes in the bottom of my cedar chest last Tuesday. Tiny things, barely big enough to cover a palm, with the soft leather cracked at the edges and one stubborn lace knotted tight like a secret. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, sunlight slanting through the vents, and held those shoes like they still carried the shape of his steps. It's funny what a mother keeps. Rattles, hospital bracelets, locks of hair. And it's even funnier what she can't seem to let go of. Hurtful words, hollow holidays, rooms that echo louder than they used to. 8 months since my husband passed. 52 years we were married. And in that time, I believed in the rhythm of family. In birthdays remembered, soup when you're sick, porch lights left on just in case. I didn't think love had to be loud. I thought it just had to last. But grief shifts the furniture of a home. It turns sons into strangers and mothers into burdens, or so I was told that afternoon. His voice clipped, like he was reading from a list he didn't want to write. Now that Dad's gone, he said, mourn, pack your things and never come back here again. There's more to it, of course. Stories like this don't begin and end with one cold sentence. They begin in lullabies and scraped knees, in bedtime stories and whispered apologies. They end, well, I suppose you'll have to stay and listen. My son Jacob was born on a humid Tuesday in August, back in 1976. The kind of Charleston morning where the air sticks to your skin like sorrow, and the cicadas hum louder than the preacher's voice. I remember the nurse placing him in my arms, red-faced and furious with life already, and me whispering, "It's all right, baby. Mama's here." He was my first and only. We tried for more, 3 years of trying, but the Lord had other plans, and eventually I stopped praying for more children and started pouring everything I had into Jacob. His father, Charles, was a steady man, quiet as a winter pond, loyal as the day was long. He taught shop class at the high school and wore flannel year-round like it was armor. Where I was wind, he was stone, never cruel, never loud, but sometimes I'd catch him staring off like the world had moved on without him. We raised Jacob in the same house I live in now, a butter-yellow 2-story tucked behind a hedgerow of camellias. Charles built the swing in the backyard, painted the shutters blue, patched the roof himself each time a hurricane flirted with our coast. We weren't rich, but we were warm, safe, predictable, in that sweet southern way where neighbors wave whether they like you or not. Jacob was a bright boy, quick to smile, quicker to sulk, all elbows and questions. I remember the year he begged for a microscope and spent the whole summer slicing onion skins and poking at pond water, like he was unlocking the universe. He had his father's hands but my curiosity. Lord, the questions that child asked. Why do stars twinkle? Why can't dogs talk? Where do people go when they die? Back then, I always had an answer. Or at least I tried. When Jacob turned 10, he started pulling away in that quiet boyish way. Less kisses, more locked doors. It's natural, I told myself. Boys grow up. But a mother knows when something starts to shift. When the laughter doesn't reach the eyes anymore. When the I love you feels more like obligation than affection. He went off to Clemson, then law school in Atlanta, came home only for funerals and Christmases. Still, I clung to the idea that distance didn't mean indifference. That somewhere beneath the grown-up aloofness, My little boy still remembered how it felt to fall asleep with his head in my lap during thunderstorms. Charles, bless him, never pressed. He'd sit on the porch rocking slow, saying things like, "He's busy, Ellie. That's the way of sons." But I saw the way his eyes softened when Jacob called. Saw the way he watched the driveway, hoping maybe this time, our boy would stay longer than a weekend. When Charles got sick, pancreatic, cruel and fast, Jacob did come. Flew in, stayed 2 weeks. Wore a brave face, talked to doctors, kissed his daddy's forehead like he meant it. We sat together on opposite ends of the couch most nights. Words dried up between us like autumn creeks. And after the funeral, well, that's where things broke. But I'll save that for a little later, my dear. The funeral was small, just family, church folks, and a few of Charles's old students who'd grown into gray-haired men with sons of their own. The pastor spoke gentle and low, like he was trying not to stir the grief too much. I sat between Jacob and my sister Ruth, clutching a handkerchief I didn't use. The tears wouldn't come, not yet. Not until the casseroles were cleared and the silence moved in like fog. Afterward, we gathered at the house. People milled about the kitchen, carrying Tupperware and paper plates, speaking in that awkward hush death always brings. I made coffee, kept my hands moving. Folks needed something to do, and I needed to feel useful. Jacob stood in the corner of the living room, back straight as a ruler, nodding politely to everyone but not really speaking. He was already back in his lawyer skin, pressed slacks, watch shining, jaw tight like he was arguing with some invisible judge in his head. He didn't sit in Daddy's chair. He didn't help me carry anything. Just floated on the edges like a guest at someone else's wake. It wasn't until everyone else had gone that he spoke, really spoke. I was rinsing a pie dish in the sink when he came in, arms folded. "Mom," he said. One word, but sharp enough to slice through steam and dishwater. I dried my hands slow. "Yes, baby." He didn't look at me. Just stared out the window at the garden where Charles used to hum and pull weeds. "We need to talk." A sentence that never leads anywhere good. He sat down at the table, didn't wait for me to join. I could feel it coming like thunder miles off. The storm in his voice. "Now that Dad's gone," he began, each word clipped careful. "I think it's time we talked about what comes next." I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe he meant the will, or funeral bills, or the checkbook I hadn't touched since hospice came. But then he said it. "Mourn, pack your things, and never come back here again." I thought I'd misheard. Truly I did. I sat down across from him, felt the wooden chair cool beneath my legs. "What did you say, Jacob?" He met my eyes then, and I wish he hadn't. Because what I saw wasn't anger. It was something colder. Exhaustion, maybe. Annoyance. A practiced detachment he must have learned in courtrooms and conference calls. "This house should be sold. It's too much for you. Too many memories. You should be somewhere safer, more manageable. I've found a retirement place in Savannah, Baycrest Hills. It's nice. They have activities." He slid a brochure across the table like he was offering me a menu. I didn't touch it. Couldn't. "I'm not leaving my home," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. "It's not a debate, Mom. I've already spoken to a realtor." My fingers tightened on the edge of the table. That cedar table Charles built the year Jacob was born. The one with his initials carved under the corner from the day he spilled paint and tried to hide it. "This is my home," I whispered. He exhaled hard, pushed back his chair. "You can't keep clinging to ghosts, Mom. Dad's gone. It's time to move on." And with that, he stood up, straightened his cuffs, and walked upstairs, into the bedroom he hadn't slept in since high school. I stayed at the table long after the coffee had gone cold. And that was the beginning of the end. Or maybe just the end of the beginning. The next morning, the light came in slow, filtered through the lace curtains Charles never let me replace. I woke with the feeling that something had been broken in the night. Not a dish or a frame, but something quiet and internal, like a string pulled too tight finally giving way. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, same as always. But it felt emptier, like the house itself had heard what Jacob said, and was bracing for goodbye. I moved through the motions, coffee, toast, feeding Muffin her half can of salmon pâté, but each step felt wrong, rehearsed, as if I'd stepped into someone else's morning. Jacob came downstairs dressed in a pressed polo and khakis, looking like he had somewhere more important to be. He didn't sit, didn't pour coffee, just said, "I've got a conference call at 10, then I'll be heading back to Atlanta this evening. I've arranged for someone from the agency to call you next week about the move." I blinked at him, toast in hand. "You're leaving today?" "I have to. There's a merger next week. I've already stayed longer than planned." I don't know what I expected. Some flicker of regret? A pause? Anything to suggest this man was still the boy I once rocked to sleep, who used to call me mama, in that syrupy voice only little ones have. But there was nothing. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm not going to Savannah, Jacob." He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the difficult one. "We're not doing this again. I haven't agreed to anything." His voice sharpened. "You're being selfish." That word hit like a slap. Me selfish? After decades of sacrifice. Of making sure he never felt the ache of the things we couldn't afford. Of praying over him in the dark when he was too fevered to sleep? "I'm 70, Jacob, not senile," I said, standing now. "And I won't be packed off like some afterthought. This house is my life." "This house is a burden," he snapped. "It's full of memories that keep you stuck. You're alone here. That's not healthy." I looked at him long then, tried to find something familiar in the hard lines of his face. But all I saw was a man who'd already said his goodbyes. Who'd already moved on. "I lost your father, Jacob. I don't need to lose my home too." He didn't answer. Just grabbed his keys, said something about traffic, and walked out the door without another word. I watched him from the porch as he drove off, dust rising in his wake. He didn't look back. That night, I sat in Charles's chair with the lights off, listening to old jazz records skip gently on the turntable. I thought about all the things I could have said. How much it hurt, how much I missed the boy he used to be, how little of him seemed left. But grief has a way of silencing you. It steals the words you need most and replaces them with echoes. And so, I sat there in the dark, with Ella Fitzgerald whispering in the background, wondering what kind of mother ends up a stranger in her own child's eyes. The days that followed moved with a kind of stubborn stillness, like molasses poured in cold weather. I watered the roses, scrubbed the porch swing, ironed pillowcases that didn't need ironing, trying to outrun the heaviness curling inside me like ivy on a wall. But no matter how I filled the hours, Jacob's words clung to the corners of the house like mildew. I didn't tell anyone, not Ruth, not the ladies from church, not even Pastor Glenn when he stopped by with a tin of lemon squares and soft eyes that asked without asking. I couldn't bear the shame of it, of being cast out by my own flesh and blood. It felt like a failure too deep to explain, the kind that starts with a tiny crack and spreads quietly for years until the whole foundation buckles. Late one afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a large white envelope stamped with the name of a senior placement agency. Inside were glossy brochures, Baycrest Hills again. "Please contact us within 10 days to schedule your orientation tour." Graciously, I folded the letter in half, then again, until the creases felt like bone. I didn't cry. Not yet. But my hands shook. And when I reached for my cup of tea, I missed the saucer and spilled it clear across the table. That night, I walked the house barefoot, touched the doorframes where Jacob had measured himself in pencil, each inch marked with the date, and a little star beside the ones where he'd grown extra fast. I opened the linen closet and breathed in the scent of lemon oil and lavender sachets, same as it's been since 1983. I ran my fingers along Charles's workbench in the garage, where the shavings still clung like feathers to his old lathe. I found myself in the attic before dawn, sitting cross-legged with photo albums in my lap, Charles's flannel shirt wrapped around my shoulders. I opened the album to Jacob's 8th birthday. Paper hats, chocolate cake, Charles midlaff with icing on his mustache. And there, tucked into the sleeve at the back, was a crayon drawing I hadn't seen in decades. A stick figure family. 3 smiling faces. Big sun in the corner, grass like green lightning bolts. Above us in shaky red letters. My home. Forever. I held that drawing like scripture, because once he believed that too. But something had shifted along the years. Maybe it was law school. Maybe it was the long distance. Maybe it was my own blind spots, things I didn't see or say when I should have. Whatever it was, the boy who once called this home his forever had now drawn a new map, one where I was no longer welcome. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Ruth. She came over an hour later, still in her gardening jeans, dirt under her nails. One look at my face, and she sat me down at the kitchen table, like she used to after Charles's diagnosis. I slid the letter across to her. She read it slowly, lips pressing tighter with each word. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were sharp. "Well," she said, "he's got another thing comin' if he thinks you're leaving this house on anyone's schedule but your own." I let out a shaky breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "You're not crazy, Ellie," she added, reaching across the table. "And you're not alone in this." But I felt alone. Deeply. Because no matter how kind Ruth was, no matter how fierce her defense, it didn't change the truth scratching at my chest like a trapped bird. My son didn't want me anymore. The third time Jacob called, I didn't answer. It rang 5 times, his ringtone still that old gospel version of "His eye is on the sparrow." Then cut to voicemail. No message. Just silence where an apology might have lived. The next day he texted. One of those clipped, polite things that stung worse than anger. "Just checking in. Let me know if you've scheduled your orientation at Bakerest. Realtor would like to take photos next week." Photos. As if the home I'd built from decades of Sunday dinners, fevered midnights, and Christmas garlands was now just another listing on some glossy website. As if my lace curtains, my cross-stitched pillows, my collection of teacups shaped like roses, Charles's favorite, were just staging clutter, to be swept aside. I sat with the phone in my lap, heart knocking in my ears. Muffin jumped onto the windowsill, tail twitching, eyes locked on the street. A breeze stirred the curtains, and for one fragile second, I thought, what if I just disappear? Pack up, leave the keys in the mailbox, vanish like morning dew? But then I remembered my roses, and Charles's rocking chair, and the sound this old house makes when it settles into night, those soft wooden sighs like it's remembering too. I couldn't leave. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote Jacob a letter. August 14th, my dearest son, I've read your messages. I've received your brochures. And I've felt, in the marrow of my bones, the weight of what you're asking me to do. I need you to understand something, Jacob. This house isn't just a house. It's where I became a wife. Where I became a mother. Where I learned how to grieve and forgive and hold space for a kind of love that doesn't always speak aloud. I buried your father not 3 months ago. I'm still waking up expecting to find his slippers by the door. I still set 2 places at dinner sometimes without thinking. This is not the time to dismantle what little remains of us. I am not ready to leave, and I will not be pushed out like unwanted furniture. I love you, but I need you to love me back with something stronger than convenience. Mama, I sealed it with wax. Something Charles taught me back in our courting days, when we wrote letters just to feel close. 2 days passed. No reply. Then one morning, while I was deadheading the roses by the back fence, I heard a car door slam. I peeked through the lattice. Jacob stood on the porch. Not alone. Beside him was a woman. Mid-30s, trim, professionally dressed. Clipboard in hand. Realtor. I dried my hands on my apron and walked to the front, every step heavy with heat and fury. He turned when he saw me. Tried for that practice smile, the one that doesn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Mom," he said too brightly, "this is Vanessa. She's just here to—" No, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said it like a locked door. The woman looked confused. "Mrs. Whitford, I'm with." "I know who you're with," I interrupted, still calm. "And I'm afraid you've wasted your trip." Jacob's jaw tensed. "Can we speak inside?" "No," I said again. "Because the last time you were inside this house, you told me I wasn't welcome." Vanessa took a polite step back. "I'll wait in the car." Jacob didn't stop her. When she was gone, he turned back to me, voice low but sharp. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said softly. "I'm being disrespected. And I won't be spoken to like a child in my own home." He sighed hard. You can't keep clinging to this place, Mom. It's not healthy. I'm not clinging, I said. I'm remembering. I'm grieving. And I'm living. You're alone. I stepped closer then, met his eyes like I used to when he'd fibbed as a boy. No, Jacob. I'm lonely. That's different. And not something that can be fixed by moving me to a place full of strangers and bingo nights. He didn't reply. Just looked out over the porch like maybe if he stared hard enough, he could find the boy he used to be. I wrote you a letter, I added. Did you even read it? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Jacob didn't say a word. Just stood there on the porch with his pressed shirt and polished shoes, looking down at the floorboards like they might offer him some excuse not to feel what he was feeling. After a long pause he said, almost like an afterthought, "It's not personal, Mom. It's just practical." I let out the softest, saddest little laugh, the kind that comes from the ribs, where sorrow lingers longest. "That's the trouble, Jacob," I said. "Love ain't supposed to be practical." His jaw twitched. "I'm trying to help." "No," I said gently. "You're trying to tidy me away. And I don't know if it's because you're grieving, or because you're scared to feel, or because I remind you of something you don't want to carry anymore. But whatever it is, you need to own it. Don't call it love if you can't stay in the room with me." He opened his mouth like he might argue, but something in my voice must have pinned him still. He looked past me, out toward the camellias blooming along the side of the porch. His face softened just enough to let the years show. The weight of being a son. A man. Someone who maybe never learned how to hold tenderness without turning it into strategy. Then like always he ran. Down the steps. Into the car. A quick U-turn in the gravel. No Wolvier. Only the rumble of tires and the sight of the realtor's clipboard left on the swing. That evening, I called Ruth again. She showed up with peach cobbler and a plan. "Listen," she said. "We're not gonna let him bulldoze your peace. But you need a lawyer. Someone local, someone who's not afraid of suits with fancy degrees." I protested. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want this to become war. But Ruth, bless her, has never been afraid of standing her ground. She put her hand over mine. "You're not suing your son. You're protecting yourself. And this house. You need a legal way to make sure no one can sell it out from under you." So I called a man named Everett Lane, a semi-retired attorney who once helped Charles settle a zoning issue when a neighbor tried to put up a privacy fence that blocked our kitchen window. Everett came by that Friday, smelling of pipe tobacco and eucalyptus, and listened to everything I told him while sipping sweet tea on the porch. At the end he nodded. "We'll file a life estate deed," he said. "It'll keep the house in your control until you pass, no matter what your son wants." It sounded cold, that phrase, "until you pass," but it was the first time in weeks I felt a sense of solid ground beneath me. I signed the papers. I sealed them in the drawer next to Charles's death certificate and our wedding license. And I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. No calls. No texts. Just silence from Jacob like I'd been erased, archived, filed away under too complicated. I kept busy. Painted the pantry. Sorted the attic. Took long walks through the neighborhood where folks still waved and said my name like it mattered. I even started journaling again, something I hadn't done since before Charles's diagnosis. Every page came out raw, part prayer, part letter, part slow unraveling of everything I'd kept tucked away. Then one afternoon a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized the penmanship immediately. "Jacob. Mom, I got your letter." I read it. Not right away, but I did. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I think I've been angry a long time, and I don't even know at what. Dad got sick and died and I was too busy to grieve the right way. I wanted to fix everything. That's what I do. Fix things. But I forgot that people don't need fixing. I'm sorry for hurting you. I really am. I'm staying away for now not because I don't love you, but because I need to figure some things out. I hope you'll still be there when I do. Jacob. I sat with that letter for hours, fingers curled around the edges like it might vanish if I let go. He was still my son. Flawed. Hurting. Trying in his own broken way. And I was still his mother. Even if I didn't understand the road he'd taken, I could leave the porch light on, just in case. The rains came the following week. Not the soft kind that whispers against the windows like a lullaby, but the loud, unrelenting kind that drums on the roof and soaks through the earth until everything smells of clay and ghosts. It rained for 4 days straight. Streets flooded. Power flickered. The world felt tilted, like even the weather didn't know how to be gentle anymore. I spent those days in the living room mostly, wrapped in Charles's old flannel, and watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass. Muffin curled beside me, her tail twitching whenever thunder rolled too close. I read mystery novels I couldn't follow and drank tea that went cold before I remembered to sip it. And I thought about Jacob, about the life we'd shared, the silences we'd built around things neither of us had ever learned to say. And then came the phone call. It was Ruth, breathless and sharp. "You need to come to the hospital, Ellie. It's Jacob." My heart dropped so fast I couldn't even stand at first. Just sat there gripping the armrest like it might tell me this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, a wrong number with a right name. But Ruth was already explaining. "Atlanta General. Car accident. Hit and run. He's stable, but Ellie, they didn't have anyone to call. You're still listed as next of kin." I packed a bag without knowing what I was putting in it. Jeans, sweater, the comb Jacob liked when he was little because it never pulled his hair. I called Everett to let him know I'd be gone a few days. Fed Muffin, kissed her head, locked the door. The drive was a blur. 4 hours of highway and too many prayers. When I got to the hospital, they took me back to a dim room that smelled of bleach and beeping machines. There he was. My son. Jacob looked smaller than I remembered. Pale. Lips cracked. One arm in a cast, bruises blooming like ink across his cheek. But his chest rose steady. Alive. I stood there for a moment before he stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Mom." I crossed the room before I even thought about it, took his hand in mine. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." He didn't cry. Neither did I. But something passed between us. Something wordless and deep and old as blood. He drifted back to sleep. I stayed the night in a chair that hurt my back and didn't care one bit. The next day, the nurse told me more. He'd been walking back from a grocery store near his apartment. Crossing the street. Someone ran a red light. Never stopped. Witnesses called 911. He'd been unconscious for a full day before he came to. "He's lucky," she said softly, chart in hand. "Could have been a lot worse." I nodded. But inside, I felt something crack open. Because here was the boy I'd carried for 9 months and worried over for 49 years. The boy who'd tried to send me away like an obligation. Who'd forgotten that love isn't a burden, it's a bond. Frayed, yes, but never broken. And suddenly none of the arguments mattered. Not the house. Not Baycrest Hills. Not the silence between us. Just him. Breathing. Alive. Jacob woke again that evening, slower this time, his eyes clearing like windows after rain. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking, voice hoarse. "You didn't have to come." I brushed a curl of hair off his forehead, the way I used to when he had the flu at 7. "Don't be foolish," I said. "Of course I did." He winced a little, shifting in the bed. "I figured you'd, I don't know, be done with me." That sentence settled heavy between us. I took a breath, long and low. "You're my son, Jacob. I was never gonna be done with you. Doesn't mean you didn't break my heart. But hearts, they mend. If you let them." He looked away, toward the hospital window. The city lights blinked like faraway fireflies behind the rain. "I messed up," he said. I thought I was doing the right thing. Keeping you safe. Giving you a plan." "You were giving me your plan," I said gently. "Not once did you ask me what I needed. You tried to solve me like a problem, not sit beside me like a person." His eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. I didn't know how to grieve. Still don't. That finally was the truth I'd been waiting to hear. "I know, baby," I whispered. Neither did I. Some days I wake up thinking Charles is just out in the garden, whistling off key. Then I remember. And it's like losing him all over again. Jacob nodded, swallowing hard. "I miss him too." We sat like that for a while. his hand in mine, the monitors beeping steady, the hum of IVs like a lullaby. And then, in the hush that follows the hardest things, he said, "I don't want to sell the house anymore." Tears welled up before I could stop them. I turned my head, just enough to keep them from seeing the full weight of it. "I know," I said, voice thick. "And even if you still did, you couldn't." He looked confused. "I signed a life estate deed," I told him. "The house stays mine. As long as I need it." He stared at me, then let out the smallest, surprised laugh. "You got a lawyer?" "Ruth's idea," I said, smirking. "Don't mess with older sisters." He chuckled again, winced at the pain, then said more serious, "I'm glad you did. We didn't solve everything that night. You can't sweep up years of distance with one soft apology. But we began something. Something honest. Something fragile. And sometimes that's enough." He drifted back to sleep with my hand still in his. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a mother again. Not an obligation, not a burden, not a problem to be fixed, but his mother. The one who came when he needed her. Who stayed. Who would always stay. Jacob stayed in the hospital another 5 days. Each one stretching and folding over itself like damp linen. I stayed too. Slept in that same lumpy chair, walked the same pale corridors, brought him Jell-O cups when the food tray went untouched. On the second day, he asked for a Bible. On the third, he asked about Charles. Was he scared? Jacob asked, voice soft like wind through pine. I looked up from my knitting. Something Ruth had dropped off to keep my hands busy. No, I said truthfully. He was tired. But he wasn't scared. Jacob stared at the ceiling for a while. I didn't say goodbye the right way. There's no right way, I said. There's only the best we can do with the time we're given. He nodded slowly, his fingers fussing with the edge of his blanket. I wish I'd come home more. I reached out, touched his wrist. I do too. But wishing doesn't change much. You're here now. And that, finally, seemed to reach something in him. When he was discharged, I drove him back to his apartment. It was small, clean, too quiet. The kind of place built for passing time, not living it. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the framed degrees on the wall, like they might explain how everything got so tangled. I'll be all right, he said, more to himself than to me. I know you will, I replied. But let me help just a little. I'll stay through the weekend. He didn't argue. That night, I made his favorite, chicken and dumplings, soft enough for his bruised jaw. He ate slowly, quietly, like every bite carried some kind of memory. Afterward, we sat on the couch with a jazz station humming low in the background. Ella Fitzgerald again. Always Ella. He turned to me, brows furrowed. Mom, what if I never figure out how to be the kind of son you deserve? I reached over, took his hand. My dear, I said, you don't earn your place in a mother's heart. You live there. Even when you're lost. Even when you slam the door. Tears finally fell, unashamed this time. He pressed my hand to his cheek. And I realized then. He wasn't just grieving his father. He was grieving everything he'd missed. The birthdays where he sent flowers instead of coming home. The quiet ways Charles had loved him without needing to say it. The dinners skipped. The phone calls avoided. The cost of avoidance, paid in silence. But grief, I told him, isn't the end. It's the place where love proves its roots. Sunday morning came dressed in soft light, and the smell of fresh rain. I woke early, habit mostly, and made coffee in Jacob's tiny kitchen. It wasn't until I opened his cabinet and saw that he'd only 2 mugs, one chipped, the other still dusty from disuse, that I realized how lonely his life must have been. Not outwardly. No, he had the accolades, the title, the apartment downtown with the skyline view. But inside? Inside, he was running on old fuel, on memories too long buried and feelings too often left unread. I made him breakfast, grits, eggs, toast with peach preserves, and left it warming on the stove. He came in eventually, walking slowly, still favoring his right side. Sat down, cleared his throat like a man about to say something hard. You remember that Christmas when I was 12, he said, when I threw a fit because I didn't get that video game I wanted? I chuckled softly, buttering his toast. You mean the year you got a hand-carved chess set from your father instead? He smiled. Just barely. I hated it. I know, I said. Charles knew too. But he wanted you to learn patience. And strategy. He thought it'd help. Jacob stared down at his plate. I never told him I appreciated it. Or that I kept it all these years. I looked at him. Do you still have it? I asked. He nodded. Top shelf of the closet. Well, I said, pouring coffee into the good mug. Maybe that's where your healing needs to start. That afternoon, he pulled the chess set down. The wood was still rich with the smell of cedar and oil, the pieces worn smooth from Charles's hands. We played a quiet game by the window. I hadn't played in years, but it all came back. The strategies, the lessons, the slow dance of win and loss. Jacob won. Barely. And this time he didn't gloat. He just sat back, hands folded, and said, "Thanks for staying." I reached over, moved his queen back to the center. "Thanks for asking." On Monday morning, I packed my things and kissed him goodbye at the door. The bruises on his face had faded some. The weight behind his eyes hadn't. "Come visit me soon," I said, touching his cheek. "The porch swing misses you." He nodded. "I will." But I saw the fear in him, the uncertainty, the guilt. So I leaned in, whispered something I hadn't said since he was a boy with scraped knees and too many questions. "No matter how far you go, I'll always be your home." I walked to my car before the tears could rise. Before he could see that even now, even after all the pain, all the silence, all the betrayal, I still loved him with the full force of a mother's heart. Because love, real love, doesn't flinch in the face of heartbreak. It shows up. It stays. And it waits by the door with the porch light on. The ride back to Charleston felt quieter than the one before. Not just because I was alone again, but because something inside me had shifted. Not snapped, not shattered, just softened. Like a knotted muscle finally releasing after years of tension. The marshes along the highway blurred past in shades of silver and sage. Spanish moss swayed like lullabies from old cypress branches. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt found. When I pulled into the driveway, the house greeted me like an old friend, peeling paint and all. Muffin met me at the door with a high-pitched mewl, her tail puffed with indignation. I scooped her up, buried my face in her fur, whispered, "I'm back, baby." The room still smelled like rosewood and lemon balm. My coffee mug was still in the sink. The stack of mail by the door hadn't moved. And yet, everything felt different. Because I was different. I moved slower that first day. Let the silence settle around me like a shawl. Walked through the garden. Brushed my fingers along the petals of the roses Charles planted our second spring here. Sat on the swing, let it rock me gently. Listened to the creak of old wood singing its familiar hymn. And I cried. Not out of sadness. Not quite. It was something older than that. Something messier. Grief, yes, but not just for Charles. Grief for the years I'd spent tiptoeing around the truth that motherhood doesn't always end the way storybooks promise. That love doesn't always return in the same form it's given. That sometimes, the deepest ache is not being unloved, but being misunderstood. I wrote in my journal that night until my fingers cramped. Wrote about the day Jacob fell from the old oak tree, and refused to cry until I kissed his elbow. About the way Charles used to squeeze my hand twice during long car rides. Once for, "I love you," and again for, "I'm still here." About the quiet pride I felt when Jacob made the dean's list, even if he never called to tell me himself. I wrote about the silence, the waiting, the wondering, the way a mother's heart becomes a room with open windows, hoping something, anything, will come back through. And I asked myself, truly, what if he never does? What if the apology in that hospital room was all I ever got? Could I live with that? Could I forgive enough to keep the door unlocked? Could I be whole again? Even if Jacob never became the son I once held close? And the answer, whispered from somewhere deep, came gently, yes. Because healing isn't about closure. I spent my mornings with a cup of chicory coffee and a book on the porch swing. Afternoons were for weeding and writing. Nights, for soft records and softer prayers. One evening, I walked out to the shed. A little tin structure Charles had kept immaculate for years. I hadn't opened it since he passed. Inside, the air smelled of oil and pine and thyme. His tools still hung on their pegs. The stool he'd carved from a repurposed porch rail sat in the corner, dusty but sturdy. I sat on it, folded my hands in my lap. "Charles," I whispered, "I think I finally understand what it means to let go without leaving." The grief hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed on my chest like a stone. Now it lived beside me, quiet and respectful, like a neighbor who knows when to keep their distance. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't touched in years. There we were, me, Charles, Jacob, smiling in matching corduroy. A summer fair in 1987. Jacob holding a balloon and a corn dog. Charles with his arm around me, sunburned and laughing. And on the back, written in Charles's blocky hand, "Let her love you her way, son. One day you'll need it more than you know." I don't know when he wrote it, or why he never showed us. But those words undid me, because they held every ache, every quiet forgiveness I'd been holding on to. I closed the album and lit a candle on the windowsill. For Charles. For the boy who left and the man still trying to come back. For the mother I still was. The woman I was becoming. I didn't need to win Jacob back. I didn't need an apology to stitch the past together. I just needed to be still. Still here. Still soft. Still willing. Sometimes, my dear, we survive the storm not by fighting it, but by learning to stand in the rain with our arms wide open. And I was learning. The first letter came in early October. It was tucked inside a pale blue envelope, addressed in Jacob's handwriting, neater than it used to be, like he'd taken his time. Inside was a card. "No ecachen. No pretense." Just a short note in his careful script. "Hi, Mom. I saw a woman on the train yesterday reading one of those books you used to read, Agatha Christie, I think. Made me think of you. Hope the roses are still blooming." Jacob no epalegi. No grand gesture. But it was something. A toe dipped into the water after a long drought. I placed the card on the mantel, beside Charles's favorite photograph. The one where we're both laughing at something Jacob said. Our heads tilted toward each other like we were in on a secret. The next letter came 2 weeks later. "Tried making your cornbread last night. I didn't have buttermilk, so I used oat milk. Regret that decision. Miss you. G." I laughed out loud when I read that one. The idea of Jacob fumbling through a recipe, cursing a lumpy batter, made him real to me again. Not just the son who hurt me, but the son who was still trying. After that, the letters came regularly. Sometimes a postcard from a bookstore. Sometimes just a torn scrap of paper with a scribbled sentence. "Do you remember that storm when I was 8 and the power went out? We played gin rummy by candlelight and I kept cheating. You let me win anyway." Each one a stitch. A slow mending of a seam neither of us had known how to repair before. I wrote back, of course. Folded my own memories into little notes. Slipped in pressed flowers. Sent him Charles's chili recipe, my peach cobbler instructions, a photo of Muffin perched on the porch railing like she owned the place. We were building something. Letter by letter. Memory by memory. And then came the real sign. He asked if he could come for Thanksgiving. "Not for the food," he wrote, "but for the company." I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time, fingers tracing the edges. He was asking to come home. Thanksgiving morning came on the wings of a Carolina chill. Sunlight sharp and gold through the bare oak branches. Air laced with wood smoke and pine. I'd been up since 5, hands dusted in flour, sweet potatoes simmering on the stove, pecan pie cooling by the window. The house smelled like it used to. Cinnamon, roasted turkey, a touch of lemon in the mop water. I'd even unearthed the table runner Jacob made in 2nd grade. The one with crooked handprints and a lopsided pilgrim turkey that Charles insisted we use every year. I didn't know if Jacob would show. That's the thing about reckoning, my dear. It requires both people to show up. But just past noon, I heard tires crunch the gravel. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door before he could knock. There he stood. Tall, uncertain, holding a foil-covered dish in trembling hands. "Green bean casserole," he said, clearing his throat. "Don't ask if I made it." I stepped aside, heart thudding slow and loud. "I don't care who made it," I said. "Just glad you brought it." Inside, He looked around like someone returning to a childhood home after a long war. His eyes lingered on the photos, the mantle, the threadbare rug in the hallway. "It looks the same," he said softly. "It's changed," I replied. "We both have." He nodded, set the dish on the counter, then turned to me. "Thank you," he said, voice thick, "for not giving up on me." I reached up, cupped his cheek. "I almost did," I whispered. But then I remembered. Love doesn't disappear. It just gets quiet when it's waiting. We ate at the kitchen table, same as we used to. Talked about small things, weather, books, how Muffin had grown too fat for her basket. And when the meal was done, we sat in the living room, full and slow and silent. He pulled something from his bag. "The chess set. I thought maybe we could play," he said. I nodded, chest swelling. "I'd like that." We played until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the floor. He didn't stay the night. Said he had work the next day. But before he left, he turned in the doorway. "I want to come back," he said. "Not just for holidays. For real. I don't know how often. Or how well I'll do it. But I want to try." Mild, wet, the kind where cardinals flash bright against bare branches, and the air smells like chimney smoke and old pine needles. I filled the house with small comforts. Cinnamon-scented candles, soft quilts, a bowl of oranges on the kitchen table just like Mama used to keep. Jacob called every Sunday now. Not always long. Not always deep. But steady. Sometimes it was just, "How's the weather?" Or "Made your soup today?" Once, he asked if I still had that recipe for molasses cookies. I sent him the whole index card, worn at the edges, Charles's handwriting on the top margin. "Don't skimp on the ginger." One evening, just after New Year's, I came home from the grocery store to find a package on the porch. Inside was a thick flannel robe, blue and gray, soft as butter, with a note tucked in the pocket. "Thought you might need this for the colder nights. Love, Jacob." I sat on the porch swing with it draped around me, still warm from the box, and let myself cry. Not out of sadness, but from the quiet astonishment of being remembered. By mid-February, Jacob came again. Not for a holiday, just a visit. He brought work with him, files, his laptop, but he left them mostly untouched. Spent his time helping me prune the roses, fixing the leaky faucet in the laundry room, changing the batteries in the smoke alarms I'd ignored too long. We cooked together, laughed, took a walk to the old creek where he used to skip rocks and catch frogs. And one night, over a bowl of apple cobbler, he said, "You know, I always thought if I came back here, I'd feel trapped. But now it feels like the only place I can breathe." I didn't say anything, just reached across the table and held his hand. Not tight, just enough to say I know. I've always known. The next morning, I found him sitting on the porch swing, a blanket over his legs, Charles's Bible open on his lap. He looked up when I joined him. "I've been thinking," he said. "About everything. About you. About Dad. About what kind of man I want to be." I waited. He took a deep breath. "I don't want to run anymore. Not from grief. Not from you. I want to be part of your life again if you'll let me." I nodded, tears rising, but my voice stayed clear. "There's room for you here, Jacob. There always was. Even when the door was closed, the light stayed on." Spring came early. Not in a grand parade of blossoms or sudden warmth, but in quiet hints. Robins in the grass, sunlight lingering a little longer each evening, the first brave daffodil blooming by the fence line. Jacob started visiting every other weekend. No big announcements, no dramatic apologies, just presence. Simple, consistent, real. He brought tools, replaced a few warped boards on the porch, helped me set up a raised bed garden, muttering about the ridiculous cost of lumber. I watched him from the kitchen window as he worked. Shirt sleeves rolled, sweat glistening on his forehead, and saw traces of Charles in the slope of his shoulders, the way he measured twice before cutting once. We didn't talk about the past much. Not directly, but healing lived in the small things. In the way he asked how I was sleeping. In the way he carried groceries in without being asked. In the way he kissed my cheek, not out of guilt but love. One Sunday after supper he asked if he could stay the night. Just for rest, he said. The city had been loud lately, his apartment too full of echoes. I made up his old room, fresh sheets, a little vase of gardenias on the windowsill, and left the door ajar like I used to. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, scrambling eggs and humming a tune I recognized. One Charles used to whistle while frying bacon. He looked up, sheepish. "Hope you don't mind." I smiled. I never minded music in the morning. We ate at the kitchen table, sun streaming through the curtains. And after, he said, "I want to be here more. Not just visits. I mean help you take care of things. Maybe work remote half the time. Be close." My heart surged, but I kept my voice calm. "Is that what you want, Jacob? Or what you think you owe me?" He looked me straight in the eyes, the way he used to when he was a boy trying not to cry. "It's what I need," he said. "And maybe, what I've been missing all along." I reached out, took his hand. "You're welcome here. Not because you need to be, but because you're loved." The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of fresh earth and jasmine. And I knew in that moment, we'd turned a corner. Not back to what we once were, but forward into something new. Now the days are slower, softer. Jacob comes by most mornings now. Even when he doesn't stay the night. He brings coffee, too strong, always black, and lets muffin wind around his ankles like she remembers who he used to be. Sometimes he sits with me on the porch swing, hands calloused again from fixing things around the house. Sometimes he reads aloud from the paper while I knit. Sometimes we just sit in silence, the kind that doesn't ache anymore. A few weeks ago, he brought over a box. Inside were photo albums, letters, pieces of childhood he'd kept but never opened. We spent the afternoon looking through them. Old report cards, finger paintings, birthday cards from Charles with corny jokes and underlined phrases like, "Proud of you, son." Jacob cried, quiet and clean. So did I. And when we finished, he said, "I think I want to plant something." We chose a spot near the back fence, where the soil is rich and the light hits just right. A fig tree. He dug the hole himself, hands in the dirt, sweat on his brow. I stood beside him, holding the sapling like it was something holy. We planted it together. And every morning since, he waters it. He says it reminds him that roots take time, that some things don't bloom until they're ready, that healing, like trees, grows slow and quiet. And I keep the porch light on. Not because I'm waiting anymore, but because light belongs where people come home. If this story opens something quiet in your heart, my dear, I'd love to know what lingered. Leave me a note below, share it with someone who might be walking that same road. And subscribe if you'd like to sit for another story sometime soon. Some tales find us when we need them most. May your home always be a place of return. And may your love, even the broken kind, bloom again.